They kicked down his door in the middle of the night. No warrant. No explanation. Just boots, flashlights, and shouting voices. A man who had spent his life serving the community was dragged across his living room floor like a criminal. His children stood frozen, watching their father cuffed and beaten in his own home. By sunrise, he was sitting in a cold cell, accused of crimes he didn't commit, stripped of dignity, and branded as dangerous. But the officers who thought they had just silenced another man made one fatal mistake. They didn't know who he really was. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe so more stories like this reach people who need to hear them. His name was Marcus Hale. To his neighbors, he was a mentor, the man who fixed broken bikes for kids on the block, who organized food drives every winter, who showed up to every town meeting with ideas to make the city safer. Marcus wasn't wealthy and he wasn't flashy. He was a school teacher, a history teacher who believed knowledge could break cycles that poverty and prejudice kept alive. His students admired him because he treated them with respect. But dignity doesn't protect you when power decides you're a target. That night, when the police stormed his home, they claimed it was part of a narcotics sweep. They said an anonymous tip linked Marcus to drug activity. His wife stood barefoot in the hallway, clutching their youngest child, begging for answers. But none came. Just orders, just shouts. By morning, Marcus's face was plastered on local news under the headline, "Teacher Arrested in Drug Bust." To his students, he was suddenly a criminal. To strangers, a monster. And yet, Marcus had never touched drugs in his life. He didn't even drink. The accusation was absurd. But absurdities become reality when backed by badges, uniforms, and headlines. Sitting in a jail cell, Marcus replayed the raid in his mind. He thought of his students who would walk into school confused and ashamed. He thought of his family humiliated in front of flashing cameras. And he thought of how quickly a man's reputation could be destroyed, not by evidence, not by truth, but by power wielded recklessly, and Marcus knew. This wasn't just about him. It was about something far bigger. The first court appearance was chaos. The prosecution painted Marcus as a trusted figure turned criminal mastermind. They said he used his role as a teacher to cover for his operations. They didn't have evidence. They didn't need it. Not in that courtroom, not in front of that judge. The officers who raided his home sat confidently in the front row, nodding along as the prosecutor spoke. To them, this was routine. Another black man accused, another case that would disappear into the system. Marcus sat in silence, jaw tight. He wanted to shout, to demand proof, but his lawyer whispered, "Don't, they'll call it aggression." So he stayed quiet. The weeks that followed were a blur of humiliation. Parents at his school demanded he be fired. His students whispered in hallways. Reporters camped outside his home, waiting for the fall from grace story to unfold. Inside the jail, Marcus met men who told him the same story in different words. "I didn't do what they said." They just needed someone to blame. But Marcus's case was different, not because the injustice was new, but because Marcus wasn't just anyone. He carried a truth the officers didn't know, one that could unravel their entire story. Still, the system pressed on. Evidence was lost. Body cam footage was mysteriously unavailable. An officer's written statement, full of contradictions, was entered as fact. In court, Marcus's public defender tried to argue, "Your Honor, there's no physical evidence tying Mr. Hale to any drugs. There are no recovered narcotics, no marked bills, no witnesses, nothing." But the judge, stone-faced and impatient, waved it off. The officer's testimony is sufficient at this stage. Motion denied. Marcus's stomach twisted. He had spent years teaching his students about justice, about the Constitution, about fairness. And here he was, watching the words in their textbooks turn to ash. Outside the courthouse, protests began. Parents who believed in Marcus, former students who remembered his kindness, and community leaders who had seen enough of these raids, they gathered with signs, "Justice for Marcus." Stop the lies. But protests don't sway courtrooms. Inside, the machinery kept grinding forward, ready to crush him. Then came the breaking point. The prosecution called the lead officer to testify. He walked to the stand with swagger, saluted the judge, and told a story rehearsed to perfection. We received credible information Mr. Hale was distributing controlled substances. On the night of the raid, we found him attempting to destroy evidence before our entry. He resisted arrest, became combative, and we had to use necessary force. Every word was a lie. Marcus's fists clenched beneath the table. His lawyer objected, but the judge let it all in. The officer's words weren't questioned. They were treated as truth. Marcus looked around the courtroom, at the jury shifting uncomfortably, at the prosecutor smiling smugly, at his wife staring back at him with silent terror. He felt the walls closing in, but he also felt something else. Resolve. For weeks, he had stayed quiet, waiting for the system to prove itself fair. But it hadn't. And now he knew. If he didn't speak, he would be buried. So when the defense called him to the stand, Marcus rose. Slowly, deliberately, his steps echoed through the silent room. The courtroom didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. "Mr. Hale," the prosecutor began, voice smooth, "you claim you're innocent. Yet officers say you resisted. Why should we believe you over them?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. Calm. Steady. "Because I know the law better than they do." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "You're a teacher, correct?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, but before that I was something else." He reached into a folder his lawyer had placed on the table, pulled out a card, held it up for everyone to see. The seal glinted under the fluorescent lights. "My name is Marcus Hale. I am a former federal investigator with the Department of Justice." The air shifted instantly. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters scrambled to scribble. Even the judge froze, her gavel hovering in midair. Marcus continued, his voice sharper now. "I have spent years investigating police misconduct across this country. I know every regulation, every procedure, every protection civilians are guaranteed under the Constitution. And I know exactly how these officers violated every single one of them." The prosecutor stammered. "Objection?" "Overruled," the judge said quietly, eyes still locked on Marcus. Marcus turned to the jury. "These men broke into my home with no warrant. They fabricated a story to justify it, and they expected I would be too powerless, too voiceless to fight back. But they were wrong." For the first time, the balance of power in that courtroom had cracked. The case was no longer about a faceless defendant. It was about a man who knew the system inside and out, and was exposing it from within. And in that moment, everyone understood. This trial wasn't just about Marcus Hale. It was about every person before him who never had the chance to reveal the truth. The revelation detonated like a bomb. Reporters poured out of the courtroom, racing to push the story live. Social media lit up within hours. Ex-DOJ investigator framed by local police. News outlets replayed the clip of Marcus holding up his credentials, his voice steady, his words undeniable. The officers who once looked untouchable suddenly looked small. Their testimony, once treated as gospel, now seemed suspicious, rehearsed, hollow. The judge, who had dismissed objections and sided with the state at every turn, now had the weight of the nation watching her every move. Days later, leaked emails exposed what Marcus already suspected. The raid had never been about him. It was about quotas, numbers, a department desperate to look tough on crime, no matter who they destroyed in the process. Marcus was just another target, until he wasn't. When the verdict came, the courtroom barely breathed. Not guilty. The officers sat stone-faced, knowing their careers were over, their lies unraveling under federal scrutiny. But Marcus didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Because his freedom, while hard-won, didn't erase the damage. His students still saw his face on mugshots. His children still woke up from nightmares of men with guns kicking down their door. And countless others who had been accused without proof never got the chance he had. Standing outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, Marcus spoke softly but firmly. "This was never just about me. It's about a system that believes some lives are disposable. And as the story spread, as protests grew louder, one truth became clear. This wasn't the end of a case. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And Marcus Hale had lit the first spark. If stories like this move you, if you believe no one should suffer in silence, then please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Voice of Injustice.